They walked along in silence for some time. Rebecca, lost in her thoughts, didn't notice the subtle changes to the environment until she shivered. The breeze dancing over her skin had a sharp, chilly edge. Her eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the low-hanging clouds in the steel-gray sky. What was with the weather lately? With the sun hidden, it was as if the color had leached out of the place, and everything seemed dull and muted. She turned to Isaac to ask him when it had become so cold, but her words faltered when she got a good look at him. His shiny hair had fallen forward over his eyes, his head was bowed, and it looked like he was struggling just to keep moving. "Isaac?" Rebecca drifted closer, taking his hand, which felt a bit clammy. "Hey, are you okay?" He stopped and lifted his head to give her a grimace that was probably meant to be a reassuring smile. "I'll be okay. He put his other hand to his mouth for a minute, then abruptly folded his legs and sat Indian style in the middle of the path, his hand slipping from hers. Rebecca stood looking down at him, not knowing what to do. He really didn't look too good, and he seemed shaky. "But, you can't be sick, right?" She threw her hands up in exasperation. "This place isn't real. It's a dream. How could you be sick?" But deep inside she was scared. Isaac's injuries never faded the way hers did. Everything here seemed to have more effect on him than it did on her. He lifted one shoulder in a lopsided shrug. Does anything in this place follow any sort of rules? His blue eyes were rueful. She heaved a sigh. "Well, I guess we'll have to stop for a bit. Maybe if you rest." She stopped and watched Isaac as he canted his head from side to side, then put a finger in his ear and wiggled it around. He glanced up at her and caught her questioning look. "Can't you hear that?" He flexed his jaw as if trying to pop his ears. Rebecca frowned at him. Was he so sick that his ears were ringing? "I don't hear—" But then she did. A sound drifted to her on a burst of cold air. It was a high-pitched tone, somewhere between an opera singer's high note and nails on a chalkboard. The minute she heard it, her knees felt weak. She lifted her hands to her ears as she glanced about for the source of the noise. Goosebumps rose on Rebecca's arms. She rubbed them absently as she stared down the path. Whatever was making that sound was getting closer. Isaac pushed himself to his knees, but he looked shaky, and he didn't try to stand. "What is it?" he whispered, as if he were afraid to draw attention to them by speaking too loudly. Rebecca shook her head. "No idea. Siren, maybe?" She glanced at Isaac. "But I don't feel particularly happy about the sound." He frowned. "Yeah, I know what you mean." The sound swelled for a moment, then decreased, and Isaac shook his head as if trying to clear it. "It's mesmerizing. But it's not like I want to go throw myself in the sea over it or something. I just feel cold and tired." And he looked cold, she thought, a bit of panic slipping beneath her breastbone and lodging itself there like an ice cube. Isaac's skin was taking on an ashen hue that she really didn't like. "There." His hushed whisper drew her attention back to the path, where the source of the noise had finally appeared. She seemed to float along the rough ground, her long white dress and hair eerily still in the chilly breeze that should have been stirring them. As the woman drifted toward them, her deep-set ruby eyes remained fixed on Isaac. She opened her mouth and let out that bone-chilling wail again. Isaac made a sound, and Rebecca glanced at him in time to see him shudder. He spoke to her, but he couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from the ethereal woman in front of him. "Not a siren," he whispered haltingly, a note of fear making his voice shake. "Banshee." Rebecca turned her horror-struck face to the approaching figure, whose perfect white face was filled with sadness as she approached Isaac. "What does this mean?" Rebecca said, her words tumbling out as she scrambled to come up with a solution. "She can't be here for one of us. We need to finish this stupid quest together." Isaac sagged, sinking back to sit on his feet, hanging his head. "I don't think I can go with you anymore." He lifted his head to meet her eyes, wrapping a long arm around his chest as if he were in pain. "She's here for me." His blue eyes were haunted. All the color was gone from his face. The banshee was closing in on her target. Rebecca inched closer to Isaac. "What do you want?" The white woman stopped a mere foot or so from them. Her eyes were deep red, like garnets or blood. There were black shadows below them. Even so, her face was the most beautiful thing Rebecca had ever seen, with high cheekbones and smooth, perfect skin. The look of sadness etched on her stunning face made her even more beautiful, chillingly so. She continued to sing, stretching out a pale, graceful hand to Isaac. He stared up at her as if he were seeing an angel, his face suddenly losing all traces of fear. Rebecca's breath made little white clouds in the freezing air. The fallen leaves nearby crackled as frost crept over them. He lifted his hand. Rebecca jumped into motion, knocking his hand aside and inserting herself between Isaac and the banshee. "Leave him alone!" Her breath left behind little puffs of steam in the cold air. Her fists were clenched at her sides, and she trembled as she stared down Death's messenger. Like what you heard? Check out the rest of Redemption by Kaye Draper, available at Amazon.com.